Hey guys, welcome to 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And here's what I need you to do. Make sure you subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel to stay up to date to everything we're doing here on 3 and Out and the Volume. John Middlecoff, 3 and Out podcast, back at it again. Rocking and rolling, baby. I'm jealous of whenever Draymond, right after an NBA Finals game or a big playoff game, just goes right home and podcasts. Like, there's just not a bigger avenue, given what he's doing, to do. I mean, it's just perfect. It's like kind of the complete opposite right now. It's the off season. It's the summer. Now, we do have mandatory mini camps, but I'm jealous. I wish I could feel that juice of I just played an NBA Finals game. Boom, go home and hit the mic. Instead, I just shower, cold shower, because that's what Jocko tells me to do. Quick cold shower, fire up the endorphins, fire up the mind, and then come find some stuff to talk about with football. The New England Patriots. I've been saying for a while, I have them red flagged. And I am not a Patriot hater. If anything, I enjoyed their dynasty the last 20 years as a fan of football, as a fan of winning, as a fan of greatness, as a fan of everything that they stood for. They pushed the envelope. Everyone in life great pushes the envelope. They worked harder than everyone else in a league that works harder than most industries. Everything that they stood for, the anger that they drew in other people, I loved it all. And I had no, dog in the race. I didn't necessarily care unless I was gambling on them. I just watched them from afar and enjoyed what they did. And no one could take anything away from them year after year in the biggest games we saw them come through. Because I appreciate most in pro sports when people come through in the biggest moments. It's why I've become a Warrior fan. If the Warriors had James Harden and Anthony Davis, I wouldn't watch their games. I wouldn't care about them. I care about them because of their 3 core players that stand for winning, championship, heart, and just determination. Win or lose, they go down swinging. And I always thought that about Belichick, Brady, and the crew. But I think they're in shambles right now. In complete and utter shambles. And listen, some people in life, like Jeff Bezos, could probably do a lot of things. And he's proven he has. Elon Musk has a lot of different pitches. He can get involved in several different industries and succeed. Those type guys are outliers. Most people, even the best at what they do, are good at a couple things. It's why that old adage, you are better if you have 10 different things in life, focus on a couple and become A's at those. Become 9 out of 10s at those. Too many people try to be 6 out of 10s at like 10 things, and they're not good at 1 or 2 things. Instead of just mastering 1 or 2, and then you'll figure out how to monetize that and paying for all the other stuff. Don't waste your time on stuff you're not good at, right? Besides like personal relationships, which we're all trying to work on. And most people, like for his talent, like Bill Walsh, more than likely could not have been a good defensive coordinator. And he's arguably one of the greatest coaches in the history of sport, not just football, in sport. And he needed George Seifert, a great defensive coordinator. Why? Because you master one side of the ball in football. There are only so many guys who can do a little bit of everything. Belichick would be unique. He could probably call offense, and I've said before, I bet he could, but he never has. Right? The reason Andy and Sean Payton, those guys have been focusing on Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, focusing on the offensive side of the ball for 30, 40 years. Learning. Hell, Andy went to BYU as a player in the early 80s. When they were setting records throwing the ball with Jim McMahon, Steve Young, they had a unique offense for the time. So he has been around the passing game as an adult, as a player, and then as a coach for 40 plus years. That's 4 decades. Matt Patricia, rumors are, the buzz in New England, that he's going to be the offensive coordinator and call plays for the New England Patriots. My first response is, that is fucking insane. That is nuts. And the only conclusion I can come is Belichick is out of options, he has no clue what to do, and he's lost for the first time in his life. Because when you look at him for the last couple decades, he's always had a plan. He's always had an idea. I remember when I was in the league and it was clear that Bill O'Brien was going to take over for Joe Paterno and the disaster that was Penn State. He immediately hires Josh McDaniels in the playoffs. And then when Bill left, Josh McDaniels, boom, took right over. Maybe it was the end of season, but either way, he always is thinking a step ahead. When Patricia was going to leave, he had Brian Flores coming up. Josh McDaniels was the first time where he had no other options. None. And forever, and one, he doesn't hire, for the most part, coaches from other staffs because he likes to teach you from the ground up. It's where he benefited with Pioli, then he benefited with Caserio, then he had Ziegler, Josh's guy. He's had a bunch of those type guys on the staff to be executives for him, and they've, for the most part, had pretty smooth transitions. Now, they've missed on drafts because sometimes he can be closed-minded with that stuff, but regardless, the resume speaks for itself. This is the first time where Matt Patricia was one of the biggest laughingstock head coaches we've ever seen. It was a joke. Like, this is not, I'm not picking on the guy. I don't know the guy. I have nothing against him. But we all watched what happened in Detroit, and it was a clown show. Even Stafford has basically said so since. And he had a front row seat there with Jim Schwartz, Jim Caldwell, who, listen, both those coaches got them to the playoffs. They had some success in an organization that historically doesn't have much success. Patricia was the worst. Patricia, you could argue, besides like Jim Tom Sula, is one of the worst coaches we saw last decade. And just the whole operation. Remember when he had the media guy sit straight up? It's like, Matt Patricia, you look like a fucking slob, bro. And now this guy, who, if you remember, he was the defensive coordinator when the New England Patriots played the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl. And it was a complete embarrassment, right? So now Matt Patricia, who also as a defensive coordinator, wasn't that great relative to Flores, who was dramatically better. I don't even think it was close. I'd argue that Mayo, Steve Belichick, and Bill Belichick, this little crew that's run it the last couple of years, has been way better than Patricia too. Like, Patricia is not a very good defensive coordinator. And you can tell me he's an astrophysicist or a nuclear engineer, whatever the hell he is. He has 17 million degrees. He's really intellectually brilliant. Great. That doesn't matter when it comes to calling defensive football plays. Because how great you are in a classroom learning about nuclear physics or rocket science, I don't care. Do you know when to call the A-gap blitz? Do you know when to call a certain coverage? And I've watched him coach defense, and I would say no. And he's a lifetime defensive coach, hasn't even sniffed the offensive side of the ball since 2005. And now they're going to make him the offensive coordinator? The most, in 2022 and 23 and moving forward, easily the most important side of the ball. And listen, I'm not saying you need a good defense, but you have to score points because the rules are advantageous for you to be aggressive and good on offense. Josh McDaniels, I'll talk about him in a second. You can't argue that as an offensive coordinator under Belichick, the dude wins and the dude has success and the dude scores points and the dude gets it done. He's been fantastic. He's been one of the better offensive coordinators in the league. Does he have a bad game or two? Sure, so does everybody. Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay have bad games. Josh McDaniels has been a big-time curveball for Belichick and helped him out dramatically for years, specifically last year when he got Mac Jones. And now we're going to Matt Patricia? Like, this happens sometimes. You get old, you get super rich, you just lose touch. And I don't necessarily think Belichick loses touch. I still think he's a fantastic football coach. I still think if every team was equal, he would dominate. But every team is not equal anymore. And he no longer has Tom Brady. And he no longer has a huge advantage. He now has a young quarterback. And they don't have many weapons. And Matt Patricia, if you gave me a list of coaches in the NFL, assistant coaches and head coaches, that I needed to call my offense in Sundays, in the fall, in the National Football League, I don't even think Matt Patricia would crack the top 100. I don't give a shit that Belichick's comfortable with him. I don't care that Belichick thinks he's his next Ernie Adams. I don't care. I cannot have him calling offensive plays. And I'm shorting the hell out of the Patriots. And on the flip side, let's face it, part of talking about Matt Patricia and the Joe Judges and the Romeo Crennels and the Eric Manginis is we make fun of them. They underachieved because they came from this tree of the greatest coach ever, and it's pretty clear, like, does he not help them out? How are they so bad? Do they just imitate and try to be little Bill Belichick's? And that's, I think, what we all kind of agree on, right? Is that they can't be themselves. Yet the guy I worked for, Andy Reid, has a ton of coaches all over the league that have had a lot of success. John Harbaugh, Sean McDermott, Ron Rivera, even Matt Nagy made the playoffs. Do you know what Matt Patricia would have done to have Matt Nagy's record that he had in Chicago, in Detroit? A lot. Because that's just a reality. Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles. First time in franchise history. Now he's coaching the Jags. Like, Andy Reid's tree has success. The greatest tree of all time is Bill Walsh. Mike Holmgren, to Andy Reid to that whole tree. It all starts with Walsh. You know why? Because clearly Walsh taught his guys. And for whatever reason, Belichick did not. Or there was some weird dynamic there, and they struggled. I do think for the first time that he gets a second chance is Josh McDaniels has a chance to change that narrative. And I've said over and over, the three coaches in the AFC West have a ton of pressure, right? Hackett, Staley, and Josh McDaniels. Because we're picking them all to make the playoffs. And obviously the Chiefs, but Andy's under no pressure. Resume speaks for itself. Won a chip, went to another one. It's been to 4 straight AFC championship games. I'll be shocked if he's not in the playoffs again. You know why? Because the Chiefs go to the playoffs every year. But one of the other guys is not going to be in the playoffs, right? So Josh McDaniels has a playoff team, literally. Inherits a team that won 10 games where their star wide receiver killed someone and is going to jail for years. Their coach got fired in the middle of the season. They had an interim coach who coached special teams. They had injuries all over the place, and they still won 10 games and got to the playoffs. And honestly, they got outplayed in the playoff game, but they still had a chance to tie it at the end. Technically win it if they went for 2. And I think Josh McDaniels, who has done a lot of self-reflection, there have been articles written about him, people say he's changed. And listen, I give you the opportunity to change. I wasn't the same 5 years ago as I am now. Hopefully in 5 years from now, I won't be the same as I'm sitting here right now. You should always be growing. You should always be adapting, especially if you're in a competitive industry. If you stay the same, you're going to get lapped. If you're not just, sometimes you got to dramatically improve. You got to be willing to adapt. You got to be willing to change. And Josh McDaniels has been open about it and claims that he has. Now it's time to tell. He inherits a quarterback, too. That's the other thing. He doesn't just come to a team, well, they got no quarterback, give him a break. No, he gets a quarterback who is now, when he's been healthy, has been really good. Now, is he a top 5 quarterback? No. Is it LaFleur taking over Aaron Rodgers? Of course not. Is it a guy, though, that you can immediately win with? And maybe Josh McDaniels, ironically, who's kind of screwing Belichick because he leaves him high and dry and he has no one to slot into his spot, can actually be a positive for Bill because we can finally be like, well, Bill clearly started teaching Josh the last several years, gave him the blueprint. Josh, had some introspection on his own, became the total package, and became a very, very successful coach. Because I do think the microscope is going to be on Josh. And I said over and over, I think their offseason has been fantastic. Add Chandler Jones. I said the Niners should have been all over him. I don't know why they weren't. Chandler Jones, stud. They trade for Devontae Adams, no-brainer. They don't pick up any of the fifth-year options and all Mayock and Gruden's failed picks. Love it. Like, they have had a clear direction. Now, their offensive line needs a little work, but it's not like their players, Derek or Waller or Max Crosby, is intimidated by the Chargers, Chiefs, or anybody. Though, last year I think the Chiefs beat him like 90-20. I do think that Josh has a chance to really change the narrative, and I'm excited to watch it. One thing with the OTAs happening this week is I think sometimes the top players just complain about stuff. And the irony is, it's why on Twitter, I've stopped complaining. I still have the same complaints in society with the government, but it's like, what's the point of just sitting there bitching and moaning? And for the most part, it's all these famous, rich people that just spend all their time complaining. It's like, what actually happens? Absolutely nothing. You just complain and complain and complain. It's why I hate Twitter. It's why I joke all the time. I hope Elon blows that thing up. Because I would be fine if it disappeared tomorrow. Because it's so negative. Now, on football Sundays and Warriors games and during golf events, sometimes for me it is enjoyable. But the overwhelming percentage of it, it's not. But I kind of need it to still get information. It's this love-hate relationship that's mostly hate. I despise the place. But it exists. So I still have to use it because it's the easiest way for me to get information. But ultimately, years past, I probably just, like most people, doing the same thing over and over started to bore me. But I do think sometimes the richest people, when they talk, we're going to see that, right? If Elon does something, if a president does something, whatever. It's no different in the NFL. And when the star players start bitching and moaning about things, we listen to them. No one's going to listen to the backup guard who's a practice squad guy. And in reality, that guy, especially in the NFL, unlike in society, random people can complain on social media. The backup guard or the special teamer, for the most part, is not going to complain because it's not worth it for him to piss anyone off. He's just happy to be there. He's got a great job. He's making 7 figures. He's got a good gig. And I talked about this when Aaron Rodgers talked about retiring. And he keeps talking about retiring. And I talked about this the other day about football's the easy part. And you often hear that. Like, the games are the easy part. It's all the other stuff. And Alex Mack gave a great quote. He just retired to Albert Breer. He said, to prepare for the NFL and prepare for football, it's a monumental task of monotony to be good. It's basically over and over doing the same thing at a really high level to sustain being a really good player, a really good team, whatever. It's very, very difficult. And in season in the NFL, I've seen it firsthand. It is a mother. The grind of the weekly game plans, of the practice, of the training staffs, of preparing your body, the whole thing of preparing for games, it is intense. But let's call a spade now. Because Aaron Rodgers and Brady and some of these guys have complained. A lot of guys don't go to mandatory or voluntary minicamps. And guess what? They're voluntary. It's what the players really fought for. Voluntary. And now a lot of star players do not attend anything all off season. Now, that doesn't mean they're not working out. They train on their own. That's fine. But they have now a 6-month-a-year job. I saw a headline today. Aaron Rodgers is going to go to mandatory minicamp. So beside the season, which basically starts August 1st, and for Aaron goes somewhere to usually the middle of January because he's not getting that far. But let's say, middle to the end of January. He has 1 month a year, or not 1 week a year, beside those 6 months that he has to show up to Green Bay. 1 week, Tom Brady, now he lives in Florida, has 1 week a year that he has to go. You go around the league, star players. Trent Williams comes to the 49ers beside the season 1 week a year. And it's not even 1 full week. Trent Williams at the NBA game on Sunday, has stuff today on Monday, 3 practices, and it's gone by Thursday. It's 5 days. It's actually 5 days. And listen, being in the NFL it's incredibly difficult. It's hard to make it there as a player. It's hard to coach there in terms of the time and the effort it takes. Whether you're good or not is a different story, but just the whole thing. I have nothing but respect for everyone that grinds in that industry. It's really, really hard. But for the players now, especially the high-class ones, the highly compensated ones, the Pro Bowlers, if they choose not to, they do not have to attend anything but 5 days in the offseason. So let's face it, it's a pretty good gig. The game's never been safer. The guys have never made more money, and they've never had more time off. Because historically in OTAs, even as of 5 to 10 to 20 years ago, they were voluntary, but they weren't voluntary. Your ass better be there. That is no longer the case. That not only players or coaches openly talk like there's nothing we can do, it's voluntary. So what they asked for in the CBA, which is fine. I don't even blame Trent Williams or Aaron Rodgers for not going. But I don't want to hear like it's pretty good gig. Like you got it pretty damn good. Because historically in the NFL, you played the season, you had 5 weeks of double days, and you had a really long offseason. Trent Williams gets just Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, they just get to hang out and work out on their own, which is fine. That's part of the perks coming with being a great player. But that's a pretty good perk. Most people don't get to work 6 months a year and make what you make. And listen, I'm pro them making what they make. They earn it. The league generates the money. It's a whole big cycle of cash, which I'm not against. I don't even want to come off like that. I'm not like the media. I celebrate cash. I don't resent it. But I do resent sometimes when we talk about the difficulty of this whole thing. The season is difficult. The offseason is an incredible thing for most of these guys. Lamar Jackson, the Ravens had talked about, I saw a headline today that they want to get back to their roots. And when they say their roots, when he was winning an MVP and they were the number 1 overall seed in like 2019. And that means running the ball more. And as of recording this, I haven't seen when the Ravens mandatory minicamp is, whether Lamar will show or not. Technically, you get fined as a veteran player $90,000 if you don't show up. But like the 49ers, for example, with Jimmy Garoppolo, now he's injured, but you can choose to give someone an excused absence. Like you don't have to fine them for not showing up. Like it's you control whether you want to get mad about their attendance or not. So to me, if I was in Lamar Jackson's camp, maybe I would say, okay, it's mandatory minicamp. We will show up, but under no circumstances will we take another snap for you, especially when you want to be in a run-heavy offense. You are admitting it, and you should. I mean, that is your best chance to succeed with Lamar Jackson and your team. Play defense, run the ball with your quarterback and your running backs. But you're going to want to run the shit out of my client. Now, technically, he doesn't have an agent, but you know what I mean. If I was in Lamar Jackson's camp, if I was his friend, Lamar, you cannot take another full speed rep, whether that's in the middle of June or whether that's in training camp, let alone the season, until you have pen to paper of your full guarantee and signing bonus. Because it is not worth it. Because they can't function and they have no chance at success in terms of doing what they want to do. And that means being a top seed, competing to win the Super Bowl without you. You have leverage in this situation. Because even Deebo Samuel, there's a chance. And I wouldn't agree with this, but Kyle Shanahan's like, we drafted LSU guy. We got some other young wide receivers. Our defense is going to be better. We could manipulate some of that offense. Now, obviously, they're better with Deebo Samuel, but he might go, he's been out of shape before. He's been injury prone. I don't feel comfortable giving him $23 million. So if he wants to hold out, that's fine. I think I could win games with other guys. And ultimately, I think he'll crack. But you can't do that with Lamar Jackson because he's your quarterback. Your whole offense, he makes the whole thing go. The reason the running game works is because of the fakes with him. I saw it when I was in Philly with Michael Vick. When you have a zone read, or when I was at Fresno State going against Colin Kaepernick in Nevada, when that quarterback and the running back are both threats, it freaks the whole thing out. And when you are as great as Lamar Jackson with the ball in your hands, and you could argue, I don't know, has there ever been a quarterback more dynamic in the open field than Lamar Jackson? RG3 had the 1 year. Michael had a couple years. But I think, and I'm not trying to be prisoner of the moment, that when he's going and when he's healthy, I think Lamar Jackson is the most dynamic quarterback in the open field I've ever seen. The combination of fast, elusive, the whole thing. Cam's the most powerful. I think Lamar is the most dynamic. It's like Barry Sanders. And the Ravens can't operate without him. So I questioned the draft pick at the time. I didn't see it. I was wrong. And then when you factor in the guy, he's beloved in the locker room. People like the guy. He's the heartbeat of your team. I think you got to figure this out. I really do. Just give him $40, $45 million a year and move on. It's just Cowboys did it. And I take Lamar Jackson every day of the week and twice on Sundays over Dak Prescott. And I don't see how Lamar Jackson would turn down that contract. Maybe not. It was 4 for 160 or whatever. So basically 40 a year. Why not 42 for 4? Guarantee every penny. I would do something like that just because that's just the cost of doing business. You don't really have a choice. And we talk a lot about announcers, and I think it got announced, Kevin Burkhardt and Greg Olsen are going to be the number one team this year. And some people think that if Tom Brady were to get bounced, maybe they would bring him for the NFC Championship game, or because Fox has a Super Bowl, maybe the Super Bowl. I don't know. Who knows? I still kind of feel that, and Brady, I think at the match, talked a little more openly about retirement. Not like Aaron, who's like, I think about retirement all the time. Just like, I used to be 100-0 play, now retire. Now it's more like 60-40, 55-45. He's just being very organic. Rodgers is kind of being a drama queen about it. Like, Aaron, just fucking, if you're going to retire, just retire. Or just take the money. Just take the money. Because that's what you're doing, taking the money, which I have no problem with. Stop talking about retirement. Either do it or not. Tom's 7 years older than you. Stop being such a drama queen. That's the retirement talk with him is really kind of getting on my nerves, just because I think it's so pointless. I think it just brings an energy siphon out of the Packers organization. Ultimately, why are you doing this? Is this the reason Devontae wanted out? He just couldn't take it anymore. Brady's 45 years old, a little different category. Brady's also never got $50 million a year. But one thing I think, looking at football in general, and I think this speaks for all sports. Let's face it, most announcing crews are not good. Most times you turn on sports and it's just terrible. And a lot of it has to do with it's hard. It's not easy. I don't act like I could do it. I have no desire to do it. It's very, very difficult to call games, whether it be a baseball game, a basketball game, a football game. I wouldn't say it's very difficult as a craft to do a play-by-play guy, but it's much easier to find a play-by-play guy than a good an analyst, right? They are few and far between to find Troy Aikman. There's a big drop-off with Fox's last crew. Just like if you watch Reggie Miller and Chris Webber, I think, was fired, was horrendous. Was so bad. Obviously, baseball can be very, very hit or miss. Though, it's such a regional sport, you tend to kind of like your guy, but it's not guaranteed. I'm lucky as a Giants fan to have Mike Krukow and Dwayne Kuiper, who actually are both former players, and Dwayne's the play-by-play guy. It's a unique thing. And I bet anyone listening Maybe you love your hometown guys. Maybe you don't if you're a baseball fan. Same thing with a basketball fan. But in football, I'm not 70 years old. I'm not listening to the radio. We consume the games through television. And when we do, if our team sucks, like if you're a Giants fan the last couple of years, you get the worst crew for Fox. And usually it's a tough listen. And I think it is difficult now, probably more than ever, to get announcers because even a guy like, Ryan Fitzpatrick, who just retired, I bet he's made 80, 90, $100 million. I was listening to Bill Simmons' podcast, and he was talking like in basketball, Dwayne Wade, who's dabbled in it, had made $400 million. $400 million. So, like, what is TNT going to pay him to call games? To make it worth his time? Because the most valuable commodity we have in life is not money, it's time. And the more money we get, that means the more options we have to pick and choose what we want to do with our time. That's the power of money, right? It gives us the opportunity to go, I want to do this. I don't want to do this. I want to do that. I don't want to do that. That's why I'm actually changing my idea of quote-unquote a money grab. I think that's a very, very popular term, and I'm actually becoming much more pro-money grab for good people. Because I believe if you're a good person and you do a quote-unquote money grab, it gives you more opportunities to impact the world. You can start a company, you can hire people, you can give more money to charity, you can influence your community, you can donate to your local high schools, you can help small businesses around the community. If you are a good person. If you're a bad person, you just pocket all the money, then yeah. But most people I know with a lot of money impact the communities greatly. Like, it's like the more money I give to the government, I just drove, when I was driving back from Tahoe, I had to go to the Sacramento airport to drop someone off. And we kind of turned off this road, and it looked like a third world country of homeless people. It was the most eye-opening thing I'd ever seen. I went down this long frontage road, and it was a community of thousands of people living on the street. And it was like, does anyone in the state give a shit about the poor people? And the answer is no. So the more money you have, the more you can actually influence and help people out if you put your mind to it. Now, we're all different, but that's just a fact. That's not an opinion. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's willing to do it. People in my life that have had some cash have always been pay-it-forward type people, help people out. So that's the way that I think. And I do believe that it is difficult. Like, I've always thought, I talked to Carson Palmer a couple years ago. And Carson Palmer, he was at this iHeart Fox put on this golf tournament in LA, and I got to go to it with Coward. And Carson was there. And I had him on my podcast. A lot of you guys are new to the podcast, probably didn't hear that pod. I have his number. I should probably hit him up this summer and see if he'll come back on the pod. And I remember talking to him, one, just at the thing. First and foremost, he's enormous. Carson Palmer, you realize, yeah, that's what a number one pick looks like. I swear to God, he looked like 6'6", 250. He's a fucking tank, an absolute monster. But super nice guy, super impressive. And then when I had him on the podcast, I'm sure you guys have seen him either on Colin or Dan Patrick or whatever. He's really engaging. And I've thought ever since I talked to him, like, this guy would be perfect for television. This guy would crush it. He's got the name recognition. He knows football. But he's kind of got, from being a rich guy, this blue-collar kind of normality that you'd want to hang out with him. That's kind of one thing Tony Romo has, is he kind of seems relatable. I think Boomer Esiason really has this for being like a famous guy. It's like, I think I could have a beer with Boomer. You know, I just could bullshit and talk some football and talk life and talk whatever with Boomer. And I think that's a huge quality to have as a TV guy. And I think sometimes when guys don't have it, it's a huge turnoff to us, the consumer. And I think that's what you're always looking for. Now, the problem is I don't have Carson Palmer's career earnings, but they're a lot. So could you convince him to do that? Would he even be interested? If I was a television network, I would be all over him. And obviously Richard Sherman, who is dabbling, I think, potentially with Amazon, I think would be fantastic. He's a big personality, but he's also kind of funny, and he clearly knows football. He loves football. I think Carson Palmer and Richard Sherman, because listen, they're always looking for it. Look at some of the guys they roll out. And listen, nothing against some of the guys that are on television because they played in the NFL, but just because you played the NFL doesn't mean you should be on TV. And let's face it, we've all watched some of these games like, this is hard to listen to. And this is the NFL. This is, $100 billion business right now. Shouldn't they go after the best? Shouldn't these television networks work with the league and try to get the cream of the crop? And I think if, those guys are difficult to get because ultimately to do the job, you have to commit. And now that Carson Palmer and Richard Sherman, those guys have made $15, $20, $25 million a year. So they know what it's like to make big money. And now that they see some of these guys making big money, it's not like they'll do the job for $2 or $3 million. So it's very expensive to acquire those guys. But I've seen Ryan Fitzpatrick talk several times big personality, clearly knows football, clearly loves football if you play that long. Why not go after a guy like that? Like, to me, Carson Palmer, Richard Sherman, you swing for the fences. Like, those are no-brainers. But why not a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick? Like, someone in my DMs the other day was like, Middlecoff, I got to push back on Phillip Rivers. He's too much of a Bible thumper and he doesn't swear. They're not allowed to swear on CBS or Fox. You're not, Troy Aikman's not dropping F-bombs like me. So who cares? Phillip Rivers, have you heard him talk? He's a huge personality. He can articulate football. He's passionate about football. Tony Romo doesn't swear. Who cares? It's more about, like, if you've seen Phillip Rivers, you feel his energy. Even if you dislike the Chargers, Phillip Rivers would be fantastic on television. It's why I immediately said when they hired Drew Brees, this is not going to work. It's not because Drew Brees isn't quote-unquote cutting edge or whatever. It's just his personality. Like, maybe one thing with the team, but I've seen him enough in press conference, like, yeah, this ain't it. This ain't going to work. Like, it's why we've talked forever about, like, McVay and Tomlin, why they'd crush it on television. Just watch guys communicate. You could tell Pat McAfee was a star when he was playing as a talker. You either got it or you don't. And Drew Brees, to me, falls under the category closer to, like, he's great with the team. Drew Brees should be like a team president. Drew Brees should be like a Pat Riley. That's his. Like Jason Witten, get in the front office. You're not a media guy. Media guy, you got to entertain. And when I even say media guy, like, if I put a microphone in your face, can you entertain me? That's what the job is. And there are few and far between guys that can do it. And part of it, when you're calling football games, the game is ultimately there, but we're hearing your voice. No one I shorted harder than Drew Brees. It's like, no chance this is going to work. And immediately, a year later, he's done. He got fired. Because they're like, yeah, we missed. I mean, I could have told him that. A lot of these television execs are fucking clueless. It's not like they know what they're doing. And they clearly didn't there. But hey, I think I'm a pretty good talent scout as well as a football scout. Hell, I might be a better talent scout than I would have evaluated football players because I'm more passionate about this now more. So I'd be all over Carson Palmer, Richard Sherman. But I think Ryan Fitzpatrick, man, I've watched enough of his press conferences and his personalities. I think he'd be awesome. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.